You cannot just walk into my house like this. Veronica Hartwell didn't even glance up from her clipboard as she stepped past me into my foyer, her heels clicking against the hardwood my grandfather had installed 60 years ago. According to HOA Section 12.4, board members have inspection authority for code violations. Your fence is 3 inches over regulation height. That fence was grandfathered in when the HOA was established in 1995. I have the original surveyor's report. She finally looked at me, that practiced smile real estate agent's perfect. All teeth, no warmth. Well, she glanced at her papers. Chen, grandfathering clauses expire after 25 years. It's 2024 now. Do the math. The sound of her voice carried upstairs, and I heard what made my blood freeze. Sarah's bedroom door creaking open. My wife was 7 months pregnant with our first child, ordered on strict bed rest after her blood pressure spiked 2 weeks ago. Dr. Foster had been crystal clear. Any stress could trigger preterm labor. My wife is sleeping. She's high-risk pregnancy. And I don't care about your personal drama, Veronica waved her manicured hand dismissively. This is about property values and community standards. Your little situation doesn't exempt you from HOA compliance. That's when I saw Sarah at the top of our stairs, one hand on her belly, confusion and worry etched across her pale face. Marcus? What's happening? Something cold settled in my chest. See, what Veronica didn't know, what none of these power-hungry HOA tyrants ever bothered to research, was that I'm a cybersecurity engineer. I don't just follow digital trails for a living. I create them, and I'd been quietly documenting every single interaction with our neighborhood's new improvement committee since they started targeting longtime residents 6 months ago. But more importantly, his house isn't just property to me, it's legacy. My grandmother bought this Victorian in 1962, one of the first Asian families on Maple Street. She faced down actual discrimination, not this manufactured HOA nonsense. She planted those rose bushes Veronica now called encroaching violations. She built relationships with neighbors that lasted decades, creating the kind of community these clipboard warriors claim to protect. Sarah and I had tried for 3 years to get pregnant. 3 years of doctor visits, treatments, hope followed by heartbreak. This baby represents everything. Our future. Our family's continuation in the home where I learned to ride a bike, where Grandma taught me chess on rainy afternoons, where Sarah and I planned to raise our children surrounded by 60 years of memories. Mrs. Hartwell, I said quietly, watching Sarah grip the banister, you need to leave. Now. Excuse me? Her eyebrows shot up. I am the HOA president, and I will not be dismissed by some "Get out!" My voice echoed through the house, and Sarah flinched. Veronica's face flushed red, but she strutted toward the door with wounded dignity. Fine, but you'll be hearing from our attorneys about your fence, your mailbox color, and your completely inappropriate security cameras pointing at public spaces. She paused at the threshold, looking back with venomous satisfaction. And next time, maybe teach your wife some manners about receiving community officials properly. The door slammed. Sarah slowly made her way downstairs, and I caught her elbow as she reached the bottom step. My chest feels tight, she whispered. Where are you watching from? Because what happened next proved that Veronica Hartwell had just made the biggest mistake of her HOA presidency. She'd threatened my family in our own home, the home my grandmother had fought to keep, that Sarah and I were fighting to fill with our children's laughter, and she had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. 20 minutes after Veronica left, I had Sarah settled with her feet elevated and a cup of chamomile tea. Her pulse had returned to normal, but the worry lines around her eyes hadn't faded. This can't keep happening, she said, rubbing circles on her belly. Dr. Foster said any spike in stress could— I know, I kissed her forehead. I'm handling it. But handling it meant understanding it first. I pulled up my laptop and logged into the HOA portal, something I'd avoided since we bought the house from my grandmother's estate 3 years ago. What I found made my cybersecurity instincts scream red alert. Violation notices over the past 6 months painted a clear picture. The Patels at 1239 Maple, cited for a decorative garden gnome that had sat in their yard for 8 years. The Johnsons at 1243, fined for parking their Honda Civic in their own driveway overnight, something every homeowner on the street did. Mrs. Kim next door, written up for her bird feeder being improperly positioned. Sarah, look at this. I turned the screen toward her. Every violation targets long-time residents, people who've lived here for decades. She leaned forward, scanning the list. What about the new families, the ones who moved in this past year? I filtered the database. 0 violations, not one. My finger hovered over a specific address, including 1247 Maple Street. That's Veronica's house, the woman who just violated our privacy, threatened our family, and lectured us about community standards. I pulled up photos from the HOA's own inspection records. She has a decorative water fountain in her front yard, direct violation of the 2019 No Water Features Amendment. Sarah's teacher instincts kicked in. She'd dealt with playground bullies for years. She's systematically targeting established families to, what, force them out? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Text. Message from an unknown number. This is just the beginning. Your kind don't belong in this neighborhood. A concerned neighbor. Sarah saw my expression change. What? I showed her the message. Her face went white. Marcus, this isn't just about fence heights anymore. My grandmother had shown me the letters she'd received when she first moved here in 1962. Typed messages on cheap paper, unsigned threats about maintaining neighborhood character. She'd kept them in a shoebox, not out of fear, but as evidence. Know your enemy, she'd told me. Documentation defeats intimidation. I screenshot the text, then opened a new folder on my desktop. HOA evidence. What are you doing? What I do best, building a case. My fingers moved across the keyboard, muscle memory from years of tracking digital threats. Veronica thinks she's dealing with some passive homeowner who'll cave to pressure. She has no idea I spent the last 5 years hunting cybercriminals who make her look like amateur hour. The doorbell rang again. Sarah tensed, but I checked the security monitor. Mrs. Kim from next door holding a covered dish. It's okay, I told Sarah, opening the door. Mrs. Kim stepped inside, glancing around nervously. At 73, she'd lived on Maple Street longer than anyone except the Martinez family across the street. I brought soup, she said quietly, then lowered her voice further. And information. We gathered in the kitchen, Sarah curled in her chair while Mrs. Kim poured herself tea with shaking hands. Veronica came to my house yesterday, she began. Said the board was conducting compliance reviews of all properties purchased before 2010. All properties, I asked. No, Mrs. Kim met my eyes. Just the ones owned by families like ours. The Patels, the Johnsons, you, me, anyone who's been here long enough to remember what this neighborhood used to be like. Sarah leaned forward. What did she want? Documentation, property deeds, original landscaping permits, any modifications made over the years. Mrs. Kim's voice trembled. She said we had 2 weeks to provide everything, or face escalating fines. I felt that familiar click in my brain, the moment when scattered data points suddenly formed a pattern. She's building cases for forced compliance or legal action. Create enough violations, stack enough fines, and eventually... Eventually what? Sarah asked. Eventually you can't afford to fight anymore. You sell, move away, and the neighborhood gets the improvement she really wants. Mrs. Kim nodded sadly. Just like what happened to the Martinez family on Oak Street. Remember them? They fought the HOA for 2 years before they couldn't afford the legal fees anymore. But Veronica had made one critical error. She'd assumed her targets were isolated, defenseless, willing to accept harassment as inevitable. She'd never dealt with someone who turned threats into evidence, who built digital fortresses for a living, and who'd inherited not just a house but a 60-year legacy of refusing to back down. This wasn't just about fence heights anymore. This was war. Dorothy Martinez had watched the Chen family drama unfold from her kitchen window, and her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. At 78, she'd seen enough neighborhood politics to recognize a witch hunt when one started brewing. Miguel, she called to her husband, who was tinkering with his ham radio in the den. You remember when Mrs. Chen first moved to this street? Course I do. 1962. People weren't exactly rolling out welcome mats for Asian families back then. Dot's arthritic fingers drummed against her mug. She'd been one of the few neighbors who'd brought cookies that first week, helped with translation when contractors came by. Mrs. Chen had been grateful but dignified, never asking for treatment, just basic human decency. Now her grandson was getting the same treatment, 60 years later. Different words, same poison. Her phone buzzed with the HOA board group text. Emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m., discussing Chen escalation procedures, attendance mandatory, VH. Dot stared at the message, her stomach churning. She'd served on this board for 12 years, elected initially to help neighbors resolve disputes quietly, reasonably, back when HOA meetings were about organizing block parties and coordinating snow removal. Veronica had changed all that. Miguel, I need to tell you something. She walked into the den, where her husband of 53 years was adjusting his radio antenna. I signed those violation notices against the Chens. He looked up, his weathered face creasing with concern. What violation notices? The fence, the mailbox, all of it. Veronica presented them at the last meeting, said we had to vote as a board. Dot's voice cracked. I knew that fence was grandfathered in. Mrs. Chen showed me the original permits when she installed it. Miguel set down his screwdriver. So why'd you sign? Because... Dot sank into the worn leather chair beside his workbench. Because Veronica made it clear that board members who don't support community improvement initiatives might find themselves facing their own compliance reviews. The threat hadn't been subtle. After Dot had questioned the Patel citation, a garden gnome that had been neighborhood fixture for years, Veronica had scheduled a courtesy inspection of the Martinez property, found 3 minor violations that had never been issues before. Their mailbox post needed repainting, their driveway had a small oil stain, their back fence was missing a single picket that Miguel had been meaning to replace. 43 years we've lived here, Dot whispered, never had a single HOA problem. Until she moved in. Miguel reached for her hand. What are you going to do about tonight? Through their window, Dot could see Marcus Chen in his backyard, photographing his fence from multiple angles. Smart kid. His grandmother would have done the same thing. Document everything, trust nothing to memory. I don't know. Part of me wants to speak up, tell the truth about those permits, about how she's targeting longtime residents. Dot's hands trembled slightly. But our medical bills are already straining our budget. If she decides to make us her next project... Dorothy Marie Martinez, Miguel's voice carried the gentle authority she'd loved for 5 decades. You remember what you told our kids when they were scared of bullies? Stand up or get knocked down. Mm-hmm. And what did you tell them about doing what's right even when it's hard? Dot closed her eyes. She could picture Sarah Chen struggling up her front steps yesterday, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, exhaustion written across her young face. Could see Marcus's protective stance when Veronica had invaded their home. Her phone buzzed again, another group text. Dorothy, need you to bring copies of original neighborhood covenants to meeting. Want to review grandfather clause language, VH. The irony wasn't lost on her. Veronica wanted her to bring the very documents that would prove the Chen fence was legally compliant. She's asking me to bring evidence that contradicts her whole case. Miguel smiled. Sounds like someone's about to make a choice between being comfortable and being decent. At 6:45 p.m., Dot sat in her car outside the community center, engine running but gear in park. Through the windows she could see Veronica arranging presentation materials, the other board members filing in with expressions ranging from resigned to uncomfortable. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen. Mrs. Martinez, I hope I'm not bothering you. Mrs. Kim gave me your number. No. Bother, dear. What can I do for you? I wanted to thank you for signing my grandmother's sympathy cards when she passed. She always spoke highly of you and Mr. Martinez. Dot's throat tightened. She was a remarkable woman. She was, and she taught me something important about standing up to bullies. She said the hardest part isn't finding courage, it's finding the right moment to use it. Through the community center windows, Dot watched Veronica check her watch impatiently. Marcus, can I ask you something? If you had evidence that could help someone, but using it might put your family at risk, what would you do? There was a pause, then. My grandmother used to say that silence in the face of injustice is just another form of participation. Dot closed her eyes, feeling something shift inside her chest. When she opened them, Veronica was at the window, gesturing angrily at her phone. Mrs. Martinez, you still there? I'm here. Dot turned off her engine, straightened her shoulders. And I'm about to do something I should have done months ago. She grabbed the manila folder from her passenger seat, the one containing 60 years of neighborhood records, including Mrs. Chen's original permits, and walked toward the community center. For the first time in months, Dorothy Martinez's hands weren't shaking. At 2:17 a.m., I jerked awake to Sarah's sharp gasp. She was sitting up in bed, both hands pressed against her belly, her face ghost pale in the moonlight filtering through our curtains. "Marcus," her voice barely a whisper. "Something's wrong." Every security protocol I'd ever learned kicked in simultaneously. Assess, react, execute. What kind of wrong? Pain? Pressure? Cramping. Different than before. She tried to stand, then sat back down hard. "And I think I'm bleeding." My blood turned to ice. At 31 weeks, any bleeding could mean placental abruption, preterm labor, or a dozen other catastrophes I'd researched obsessively since her high-risk diagnosis. "We're going to the hospital, right now." The drive to St. Mary's felt like navigating through molasses. Every red light an eternity, every contraction that crossed Sarah's face a knife in my chest. She breathed through gritted teeth, timing them on her phone. 4 minutes apart, she managed. "They're getting stronger." I squeezed her hand while running every red light I dared. Dr. Foster said contractions don't necessarily mean labor, could be stress-related. At 31 weeks? Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Marcus, if this baby comes now, it won't." But my voice cracked on the words. Dr. Foster met us at the emergency entrance, her usually composed demeanor slightly frayed from being pulled out of bed. "Let's get you upstairs immediately. I've already called the NICU team as a precaution." The next 4 hours blurred together in fluorescent lighting and medical terminology. Monitors beeping, IV lines snaking across Sarah's arms, nurses speaking in hushed, urgent tones outside our curtained cubicle. "The contractions have stopped," Dr. Foster finally announced as dawn broke through the hospital windows. "Baby's heartbeat is strong, positioning looks good. I felt my first full breath since 2 a.m. So everything's... not everything." Her expression grew grave. "Sarah's cervix has started to efface. We're looking at complete bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy, and I mean complete. No stairs, no lifting, minimal movement beyond bathroom trips." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We can't lose this baby. We tried for 3 years. You won't lose this baby if we're extremely careful, but that means eliminating every possible stressor from your environment." Dr. Foster looked directly at me. "Physical stress, emotional stress, environmental disruptions, everything needs to go." As we drove home in early morning light, Sarah dozed fitfully in the passenger seat. My phone buzzed with a text from that same unknown number. "Hospital visit won't save you from HOA compliance. Pay your fines or face escalation." They'd been watching us, tracking our movements. Another text arrived before I could process the first. "Sick wife won't protect you forever. Community standards apply to everyone." I pulled into our driveway and helped Sarah into the house, settling her in the living room recliner with pillows, water, and her phone within reach. "I need to make some calls," I told her. "Work stuff." But the first call wasn't to work. It was to my buddy Jake, a private investigator who specialized in harassment cases. "Someone's been monitoring my family's medical emergencies and using them for intimidation," I explained. "I need to know who." "Text harassment with medical surveillance? That's stalking territory, Marcus. You file a police report yet?" "No, but..." "File it today. Create an official record. Then we'll trace those numbers and figure out who's playing games with your pregnant wife's health." The second call was to my company's legal department. As a cybersecurity engineer for a major tech firm, I had access to resources most homeowners never dreamed of. "Sarah's doctor ordered complete stress elimination," I explained to our corporate counsel. "Someone's using her medical condition to escalate harassment. I need to know my legal options." "Send me everything," she said. "Screenshots, HOA communications, medical documentation. If they're using pregnancy complications to intimidate, that crosses several legal lines." The third call was to my manager. "I need to work remotely for the next 2 months. Family medical situation. Take whatever time you need. Your projects can wait." By noon, I had a plan forming. Not just defensive measures, offensive ones. Sarah woke up from her nap looking more rested, but still fragile. "Any more messages?" I showed her my phone, now displaying a clean inbox. I blocked the number and forwarded everything to the police, but Sarah... I sat beside her chair carefully. "This isn't going to stop with blocking numbers." "What do you mean?" "Veronica's escalating because she thinks we're vulnerable, that your condition makes us easy targets." I took her hand. "She has no idea she just declared war on someone whose entire career involves hunting people who hide behind anonymous threats." Sarah studied my face. "What are you planning?" "To give her exactly what she's asking for: complete documentation, full compliance review, every regulation checked and cross-referenced." I smiled grimly. Starting with her own property. Marcus. Trust me. By the time I'm done, Veronica Hartwell is going to wish she'd never heard the name Chen. My phone buzzed with a text from Dot Martinez. Can we talk? I have information you need. Finally, an ally with inside access. This was about to get very interesting. Dot Martinez arrived at our house 20 minutes after her text, carrying a weathered manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd finally made peace with a difficult decision. I brought Miguel, she said, gesturing to her husband waiting in their car. He wanted to stay nearby in case Veronica drives by. Sarah was resting in the living room, propped up with pillows per Dr. Foster's orders. I settled Dot at our kitchen table, noting how her hands no longer trembled when she opened that folder. This contains every official document from the original neighborhood development, she began. Property surveys, landscaping permits, architectural approvals. Your grandmother's fence permit is right? Here, dated March 15, 1987, she placed a yellow document in front of me, official county seal, surveyor signatures, everything legally binding. But what caught my attention was the attached amendment. What's this additional clause? Perpetual grandfathering provision. Any structure approved during initial development phases remains compliant regardless of future HOA modifications. Dot's voice gained strength. Your fence isn't just grandfathered, it's permanently protected. I photographed the document with my phone, then looked closer at the folder's contents. Dot, what else is in there? Everything Veronica asked me to bring to tonight's meeting, original neighborhood covenants, architectural guidelines, every permit issued between 1960 and 1995. She pulled out another document, including this. The paper she handed me made my cybersecurity instincts light up like Christmas morning. It was Veronica's own property survey from when she purchased her house 8 months ago. Her decorative fountain, I said, scanning the measurements. Installed without permits, no HOA approval, direct violation of county wetland proximity regulations. Dot smiled grimly. And that's not the worst part. She flipped to the next page. Her property line survey was never filed with the county. Technically, her fence extends 18 inches into the public easement. Sarah called from the living room. Marcus, what did you find? Evidence that our HOA president has been operating an illegal water feature on improperly surveyed land while citing other people for compliance violations. But Dot wasn't finished. She pulled out a thick stack of meeting minutes spanning the past year. I've been secretary of this board for 12 years. I keep detailed records. Her finger traced down page after page. Every citation, every fine, every compliance review has targeted families who have lived here longer than 5 years. I spread the papers across our kitchen table, my programmer's brain automatically organizing the data. This isn't random harassment, it's systematic displacement. Miguel and I think she's working with a property development company. New families moving in are all connected somehow, either through her real estate agency or her husband's construction business. The pieces clicked together. She's not just power-hungry, she's running a gentrification scheme. Using HOA authority to force out longtime residents, then flipping properties to buyers in her network. Dot's voice hardened. Mrs. Kim showed me a letter she received yesterday. Someone offered to buy her house for $30,000 over market value to help with her HOA legal expenses. My phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Emergency room visits expensive, HOA fines adding up, maybe time to consider selling. I showed the message to Dot, whose face went pale. They're monitoring your family's medical situation. Gets worse, I said, scrolling through my blocked messages folder. They knew we were at the hospital within an hour of arriving. Someone's either tracking our movements or has inside information. Sarah's voice carried from the living room, strained with exhaustion. Marcus, I need you. I helped her to the bathroom, supporting her carefully. When we returned to the kitchen, Dot was staring at something in her folder with growing alarm. What is it? Board meeting minutes from last month, the night after your first violation notice. She looked up with haunted eyes. Veronica proposed what she called enhanced monitoring of problematic residents. Enhanced monitoring? Private investigator. Someone named Benjamin Hartwell listed as community safety consultant. Her husband? Her husband runs a security company, and according to these invoices, Dot's voice dropped to a whisper, he has been billing the HOA for residential surveillance services since June. I felt that familiar cold rage settle in my chest. They hadn't just been harassing us, they'd been stalking us, watching our house, tracking our routines, timing their intimidation around Sarah's medical appointments. Dot, I need you to do something for me. What? Tonight's board meeting. Go, act normal, but record everything. I handed her a small digital recorder from my home office. Can you do that? She took the device with steady hands. After what they've put you through? After what they're planning for other families? Her jaw set with determination. Miguel was right. Sometimes doing what's comfortable and doing what's decent aren't the same thing. As Dot gathered her papers, preparing to leave, I realized we'd moved past simple HOA disputes into something much more serious. Stalking, harassment, systematic fraud using official authority. Veronica thought she was dealing with isolated homeowners who'd fold under pressure. She was about to discover she'd targeted someone who specialized in dismantling criminal networks. After Dot left for the board meeting, I helped Sarah get settled for the evening, then did something I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I went down to the basement. My grandmother's house had good bones, but the basement still felt like stepping back in time. Exposed wooden beams, stone foundation walls, and dozens of cardboard boxes I'd never gotten around to sorting after her funeral. The single overhead bulb flickered when I pulled the chain, casting dancing shadows across stacks of memories I wasn't ready to face. But tonight wasn't about grief. Tonight was about ammunition. Grandma had been meticulous about documentation. If there were records that could help us, they'd be down here somewhere. I started with the box labeled Property Records 1962-2010. Inside, manila folders organized by decade contained everything from the original purchase agreement to utility installation permits. But it was the folder marked Neighborhood Correspondence that made me stop breathing. Letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten threats, typed complaints, unsigned notes shoved under her door or left on her windshield. All from the 1960s and 70s when she'd first moved to Maple Street. Your kind doesn't belong here. Property values suffer when neighborhoods change. Consider moving somewhere more appropriate. The language was nearly identical to the texts Sarah and I had been receiving. 60 years apart. Same poison, different delivery method. But Grandma hadn't just kept the hate mail. She'd documented her responses. Carbon copies of letters to the police, the city council, the original neighborhood association, detailed logs of incidents, lawn damage, mailbox tampering, harassing phone calls, and photographs. Dozens of black and white photos showing vandalism to her property, cars parked across her driveway, neighbors pointing and whispering. My hands shook as I flipped through the evidence of her quiet war against systematic harassment. She'd fought this battle alone, with dignity and documentation, building an unshakable legal record that eventually forced her tormentors to back down. The basement's wooden stairs creaked as I moved to the next box. Legal documents 1960 to 2000 contained something that made my cybersecurity training scream with recognition. A private investigator's report from 1968. Grandma had hired someone to trace the source of anonymous harassment. The investigation revealed a coordinated effort by 3 families to pressure her into selling, families who had financial connections to a development company planning to buy up the entire block. Sound familiar. I photographed every page with my phone, then kept digging. Box after box revealed the systematic nature of her documentation. She'd kept records of everything. Which neighbors participated in the harassment, which ones stood by silently, and which few had offered support. The Dot Martinez was on the supporters list. A loose floorboard creaked under my feet as I moved toward the furnace area. Something about the sound felt wrong, too hollow. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edge until I found what made it different. The board wasn't nailed down. It lifted easily, revealing a metal box hidden in the space between joists. Inside, I found Grandma's real treasure trove. Financial records showing the connection between her harassers and Pacific Development Corporation. Bank statements proving cash payments to neighbors who participated in the intimidation campaign. And a legal settlement agreement from 1974. The development company had paid her $50,000 to drop a harassment lawsuit, plus a promise of no future interference with property rights. But the most damaging document was a memo written on Pacific Development letterhead. Chen property acquisition unsuccessful. Resident documentation too extensive for legal challenge. Recommend discontinuing project and focusing on more vulnerable targets. My phone buzzed with a text from Dot. Meeting over. Recording successful. You need to hear this immediately. I climbed out of the basement carrying 3 boxes of evidence, feeling like I'd just inherited more than property. I'd inherited a playbook for fighting systematic harassment. Sarah was awake when I reached the living room, propped against her pillows with worried eyes. Find anything useful down there? I set the boxes on our coffee table, careful not to disturb her rest. Grandma didn't just survive harassment, Sarah. She documented every detail and used it to destroy the people targeting her. What do you mean? I mean, we're not the first family they've tried to force out of this neighborhood, and thanks to Grandma's records, I know exactly how this ends. The front door's security chime announced Dot's arrival. Through the window, I could see her hurrying up our walkway with Miguel close behind, both of them looking like they'd seen something that changed everything. Marcus, Dot's voice carried urgency as I opened the door. We have a problem, a big one. I gestured them inside, noting the digital recorder clutched in Dot's trembling hand. The recording? Got everything. Veronica's entire plan, the connection to her husband's company, the timeline for forcing out remaining longtime residents. Dot's voice shook. But Marcus, they're not just targeting your family anymore. What do you mean? Miguel stepped forward, his weathered face grim. They're planning to call Child Protective Services, anonymous tip about unsafe living conditions for a newborn. Sarah gasped from the living room. They can't, we haven't even... They can and they will, Dot said. Veronica specifically mentioned using health and safety concerns to expedite family relocations. I felt something cold and dangerous settle in my chest. Threatening property was one thing. Threatening my unborn child was something else entirely. Play the recording. Dot's hands trembled as she pressed play on the digital recorder. Veronica's voice filled our living room with crystal clarity, and what we heard made Sarah grip my arm so tightly her nails drew blood. The Chen situation requires immediate escalation, Veronica's recorded voice announced. Standard harassment isn't moving them fast enough. Another voice, male, familiar. What did you have in mind? Benjamin's surveillance shows the wife is high-risk pregnancy, perfect leverage. The casual cruelty in her tone made my jaw clench. One anonymous CPS. Call about unsafe conditions for a newborn should do it. That's fraud, Veronica. That's efficiency. File the complaint 2 weeks before her due date. Even if it's unfounded, the investigation process will create enough stress to either cause medical complications or force them to relocate for health reasons. Sarah's face went white. Marcus. I held up my hand, listening as the recording continued. What about the other longtime residents? Kim's next, then the Martinez family. I've already got buyers lined up through Benjamin's construction contacts. We clear out the old guard, flip to our network, neighborhood property values jump 30%. The recording captured shuffling papers, then Veronica again. The beauty is, we're using their own emotional attachments against them. They think this is about community standards. Really, it's about profit margins. Dot clicked off the recorder, her face flushed with anger and shame. There's more. About surveillance schedules, which houses they're targeting next, even discussion about planting violations. Planting violations? Miguel spoke up. Benjamin's security company has master keys to community mailboxes. They've been tampering with landscaping, moving property markers, creating violations where none existed. I stood up, pacing to the window. My grandmother's rose bushes swayed in the evening breeze, the same roses Veronica had cited as encroaching violations. Now I understood. They weren't violations at all. They were pretexts. Sarah, I need you to call Dr. Foster. Tell her we need documentation of your current condition, your treatment plan, everything. Official medical records. Why? Because when someone files a false CPS report, we're going to need proof of exactly how stable and prepared we are. I turned to Dot and Miguel. How many other board members know about this plan? Just the inner circle. Veronica, Benjamin, and 2 newer board members who moved in last year. Dot's voice hardened. The rest of us have been rubber stamps, intimidated into compliance. I pulled out my laptop, my cybersecurity instincts finally finding their target. Dot, I need you to do something that might feel uncomfortable. What? Tomorrow night, there's going to be another emergency board meeting. You're going to call it. I can't just... You're the secretary. You have authority to call meetings for urgent community matters. I opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. And we're going to give Veronica exactly what she wants. A chance to publicly present her Chen solution. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter. Marcus, what are you planning? Something Grandma taught me. When people reveal their true nature, make sure everyone's watching. I turned the laptop screen toward them. I'm building a digital evidence package. Every harassment text, every fraudulent violation, every surveillance incident, complete with timestamps, IP traces, and communication patterns. Dot leaned forward. For the police? For the police, the county prosecutor, the state HOA regulatory board, and the local news. I smiled grimly. But first, we're going to let Veronica hang herself with her own words. My phone rang. Jake, my private investigator friend. Marcus, you need to hear this. Those anonymous texts, they're coming from a burner phone registered to Benjamin Hartwell's security company. Can you prove it? Already did. Phone was purchased with company credit card, activated at their business address. Your harassment campaign has a paper trail. IP, put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. Jake, how long would it take to trace all their surveillance activities? Give me 48 hours. If they've been monitoring multiple properties, there'll be digital footprints everywhere. These aren't criminal masterminds. They're amateurs playing with professional tools. After Jake hung up, I looked around at my small army of allies. Sarah, determined despite her exhaustion. Dot and Miguel, finally ready to fight back after months of intimidation. And somewhere in my basement, 3 generations of evidence proving that bullies who target the Chen family eventually destroy themselves. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Tomorrow night, Dot calls an emergency board meeting to discuss community safety concerns. She'll request that all board members present their enforcement strategies for public review. Veronica will never agree to that, Miguel said. She'll have to. HOA bylaws require transparency for community safety issues, and her ego won't let her pass up a chance to publicly justify her actions. I pulled up the neighborhood directory on my laptop, especially when she thinks she's talking to a room full of intimidated neighbors. Dot's eyes widened with understanding, but she won't be. No, she'll be talking to a room full of witnesses, with everything recorded, while a criminal investigation builds around her surveillance operation. I closed the laptop. My grandmother spent 60 years building relationships in this neighborhood. Time to call in some favors. Sarah reached for my hand. What if this doesn't work? What if they follow through with the CPS threat? Then they'll discover that threatening a cybersecurity expert's family while conducting illegal surveillance was the worst decision of their lives. I looked at the boxes of my grandmother's evidence, then at the digital files I'd compiled. 60 years apart, 2 generations of documentation, 1 family's refusal to be driven from their home. Veronica thought she was playing chess with isolated homeowners. She was about to learn she'd started a war with someone who'd inherited both the weapons and the will to finish it. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I had made 17 phone calls and sent 43 emails. My grandmother's address book, yellowed with age, had become my secret weapon. Mrs. Patterson from 1228 Maple answered on the first ring. Marcus Chen? My goodness, I haven't heard from your family since your grandmother's funeral. How's that beautiful wife of yours? Actually, Mrs. Patterson, that's why I'm calling. Sarah and I need your help. Within 30 minutes, I'd explained the situation to 6 longtime residents. Their responses varied from shocked to furious to grimly unsurprised, but every single one ended the same way. What do you need us to do? Sarah watched from her recliner as I worked, occasionally offering suggestions between doctor-ordered rest periods. Your grandmother would be proud, she said during a brief break in my calls. She'd be furious, I corrected. But yeah, probably proud too. My laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Jake. Surveillance evidence is worse than we thought. Check your secure email. The files he'd sent made my blood run cold. Benjamin's security company hadn't just been monitoring our house. They'd installed covert cameras in public spaces throughout the neighborhood, street-facing angles that captured every resident's daily routines, license plates, visitor patterns. Sarah, look at this. I turned the laptop toward her. They've been building profiles on every family, daily schedules, work patterns, when houses are empty. The scope of their operation was staggering. Detailed spreadsheets tracking which residents were most likely to comply with violations, which ones had financial vulnerabilities, which families had children or elderly members who might be leverage points. Our neighbors weren't just facing harassment. They were being systematically studied for exploitation. My phone rang. Dot Martinez, her voice tight with anxiety. Marcus, Veronica's called an emergency board meeting for tonight. She's furious about something, demanding to know who's spreading malicious rumors about board activities. Perfect. Did you send the community-wide notice I drafted? Went out 20 minutes ago. Public meeting, all residents welcome, community safety discussion. Dot paused. I'm scared, Marcus. What if this backfires? It won't backfire because we're not the ones breaking the law. After lunch, while Sarah napped, I drove to the police station. Officer Sullivan, who specialized in harassment cases, reviewed my evidence with growing amazement. "This is organized stalking," he said, studying Jake's surveillance report. "Fake violations, coordinated harassment, illegal monitoring. We're looking at multiple felonies. Can you arrest them tonight?" "Not yet. We need them to either confess or escalate to something we can charge immediately." He leaned back in his chair. "But if they make threats in a public meeting with witnesses, they will. Veronica's ego won't let her back down in front of the neighborhood. Then we'll be ready." I returned home to find Sarah on the phone with Dr. Foster, documenting every detail of her medical care, creating an unbreachable record in case the CPS threat materialized. "Dr. Foster wants to attend tonight's meeting," Sarah told me after hanging up. "She says false reports targeting pregnant women are something she takes personally." At 6 p.m., cars began arriving at the community center. I watched from our front window as longtime residents I hadn't seen in months emerged from houses throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson with her walking cane, the Johnsons with their teenage kids, Mrs. Kim with a folder of her own documentation. My grandmother's network, awakening after decades of quiet existence. "They're all coming," Sarah marveled, watching the steady stream of familiar faces. "Grandma spent 60 years building relationships. Time to see what that's worth." We arrived at the community center 20 minutes early. The main room was already half full, with more residents filing in every minute. I'd expected maybe 15 people. There had to be 50 already, with more coming. Veronica stood at the front table, her usual composure cracking as she realized this wasn't going to be a small, controllable board meeting. Benjamin sat beside her, constantly checking his phone with nervous energy. Dot approached our table, carrying her recorder and a stack of documents. "Everyone's here," she whispered. "All the long-time residents plus some newer families who've been getting suspicious about the violation patterns. Any board members backing out? 2 called in sick. Convenient timing." Her eyes hardened. "But the ones who are here are the ones who've been rubber stamping everything." I looked around the room, seeing faces from every decade of neighborhood history. People my grandmother had helped with translation, elderly residents she'd checked on during storms, young families she'd welcomed with homemade cookies. They weren't just here for Sarah and me. They were here because systematic harassment of one family was a threat to everyone. Veronica called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m., her voice projecting false authority over the murmuring crowd. "This emergency session has been called to address malicious rumors being spread about legitimate HOA enforcement activities." Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the room like a blade. "What rumors? That you've been illegally surveilling our homes?" Veronica's face flushed. "Mrs. Patterson, you're out of order. This is a board meeting, not a public forum." "Actually," Dot stood up, consulting her papers, "according to the community notice, this is a public safety discussion. All residents have SPIEs, aching rights." The trap was set. Veronica could either admit she'd lost control of her own meeting, or she could try to defend her actions in front of 60 witnesses. Her ego made the choice for her. "Fine. Let's discuss safety. Let's talk about residents who refuse to comply with community standards, who create unsafe conditions for their neighbors, who think pregnancy excuses lawlessness." She was looking directly at Sarah and me. The room went dead quiet. The silence in that community center stretched like a held breath. 60 pairs of eyes stared at Veronica as her words hung in the air, and I realized she'd just made the fatal mistake every bully eventually makes. She'd revealed her true nature in front of witnesses. Mrs. Patterson broke the silence first, her voice carrying the authority of 8 decades on this earth. "Veronica Hartwell, are you suggesting that a pregnant woman receiving medical care is somehow unsafe for this community?" "I'm suggesting," Veronica's voice rose defensively, "that some residents use personal circumstances to avoid accountability. The Chen family has multiple violations." "The Chen fence was permitted in 1987, Mrs. Kim interrupted, standing with surprising steadiness. "I helped Mrs. Chen plant those roses the same year. They've never been violations before." Veronica's composure cracked further. "Regulations change. Communities evolve. Some people adapt, others what?" The voice came from the back of the room. Dr. Foster had arrived, still in her medical scrubs, her presence adding weight to every word. others receive medical care during high-risk pregnancies? Dr. Foster, this isn't a medical matter. A patient of mine was told yesterday that someone plans to file false CPS reports about her newborn's safety. Dr. Foster's voice cut through the room like surgical steel. That sounds medical to me. The room erupted in angry murmurs. False CPS reports crossed a line that even Veronica's supporters couldn't defend. Benjamin leaned over, whispering urgently in his wife's ear, but she brushed him off. That's a baseless accusation, Veronica snapped. No one has discussed. Actually, Dot stood up, her hands no longer trembling. They have. She held up the digital recorder, and every person in that room leaned forward. As board secretary, I've documented tonight's discussion, but I've also documented previous board meetings where specific threats were made against the Chen family and other longtime residents. Veronica's face went white. Dorothy, you're out of order. Am I? Because according to HOA bylaws, all board proceedings must be recorded for transparency. Dot's voice grew stronger with each word. Should I play last night's recording for the community? You can't. That was a closed session. Actually, HOA regulations require that any discussion affecting community safety be made available to all residents. I stood up, pulling out my phone, which is why I've already forwarded copies to the county prosecutor's office. The room buzzed with shocked whispers. Veronica looked around desperately, realizing she'd walked into a trap of her own making. This is harassment, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, said a voice from the middle of the room. Mr. Johnson from 1243 Maple stood up, holding a stack of papers. Harassment is getting cited for parking my car in my own driveway. Harassment is being threatened with fines for violations that don't exist. Harassment, added Mrs. Patterson, is targeting families who've lived here for decades, while ignoring identical conditions on properties owned by board members. One by one, residents began standing, sharing their own stories of suspicious violations, intimidating visits, anonymous threats. The pattern became undeniable: systematic targeting of longtime residents, coordinated pressure to sell, preferential treatment for newcomers connected to the board. Veronica tried to regain control. These are isolated incidents taken out of context. Like this? I pulled out my grandmother's folder, the one containing 60 years of documented harassment patterns. Because what you're doing to our family isn't new. It's the same playbook used against my grandmother in the 1960s. I held up the faded photographs, the typed threats, the documented vandalism. She kept records of everything: names, dates, financial connections between harassers and development companies. Sound familiar? Benjamin was frantically texting on his phone, probably trying to reach their lawyer, but it was too late. The truth was spilling out faster than they could contain it. Your husband's security company, I continued, has been conducting illegal surveillance of multiple properties, installing cameras in public spaces without permits, tracking residents' movements, building profiles for harassment campaigns. That's not... We never... Benjamin started to speak, then stopped as he realized every word was being recorded by multiple devices throughout the room. Officer Sullivan appeared in the doorway, flanked by two other officers. He'd been waiting outside, listening through the open windows, gathering evidence in real time. Mrs. Hartwell, he said calmly, we'd like to discuss some surveillance equipment that's been placed illegally throughout this neighborhood. Veronica's face crumbled as she realized her kingdom of intimidation was collapsing around her. The room full of neighbors she'd tried to control was staring at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. This isn't over, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow. You're right, I said, standing up. It's not over. It's just beginning. Sarah squeezed my hand from her wheelchair. Dr. Foster had insisted she use one to minimize stress, and I saw something in her eyes that made my chest tight with pride. Not fear anymore, hope. The community my grandmother had spent 60 years building was finally standing together. And Veronica Hartwell was about to discover what happened when you declared war on a neighborhood full of people who'd decided they'd had enough. Officer Sullivan stepped into the community center, his presence shifting the entire atmosphere from neighborhood dispute to criminal investigation. The room that had buzzed with angry whispers fell silent as residents realized they were witnessing something much bigger than HOA politics. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Hartwell, Sullivan said, his voice professionally calm. We have a warrant to search your property and your business premises. We'd like you to come with us voluntarily for questioning about harassment, stalking, and illegal surveillance activities. Benjamin shot to his feet. We want our lawyer. That's your right. But first, Let me show everyone what we found during our preliminary investigation. Sullivan nodded to me, and I connected my laptop to the community center's projection system. The first image that appeared on the wall made the entire room gasp. A detailed surveillance map of our neighborhood, with every house marked by colored pins. Green pins for compliant residents, red pins for priority targets, yellow pins for undecided. Our house had a red pin with a note: high stress, medical vulnerability, prime for quick resolution. Mrs. Kim's house had a similar notation: elderly, isolated, minimal support network. The Martinez home was marked yellow. Board member potential resistance, handle carefully. This surveillance map was found on Benjamin and Hartwell's business computer, Sullivan explained, along with detailed files on every family in this neighborhood. I clicked to the next slide. Financial records showing payments from Pacific Development Corporation, the same company that had targeted my grandmother 60 years ago, to Benjamin's security firm for neighborhood assessment services. They weren't just harassing us, I told the room. They were being paid to drive us out so the properties could be flipped to specific buyers. Veronica finally found her voice. That's not what this is about. This is about community standards. Community standards? Dr. Foster stepped forward, her medical authority adding weight to every word. Like threatening to file false reports with Child Protective Services about an unborn baby? She held up her phone, displaying a text message. This was sent to my office yesterday. Chen baby will be born into unsafe conditions. Medical professionals should report concerns immediately. Want to guess what number it came from? Sullivan checked his notes. Same burner phone registered to Hartwell Security that sent harassment texts to the Chen family. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Even targeting pregnant women was crossing lines that stunned longtime residents who'd weathered decades of neighborhood politics. But I wasn't done. I clicked to the next slide. Security camera footage from my own system. This is Benjamin Hartwell planting dead vegetation along our fence line at 3 a.m. last Tuesday, I narrated as the grainy footage showed a figure in dark clothing, creating the landscaping violations his wife cited 3 days later. The next clip showed someone tampering with Mrs. Kim's mailbox, loosening the post to create an unstable structure violation. Professional harassment, I continued. They create violations, then fine residents for problems they cause. Ed themselves. Dot stood up, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. I've been complicit in this. As board secretary, I signed violation notices I knew were fraudulent because I was afraid of being targeted myself. She looked around the room at neighbors she'd known for decades. But staying silent about injustice is just another form of participation. My friend Mrs. Chen taught me that 60 years ago, and her grandson reminded me last week. Mrs. Patterson struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on her walking cane. Dorothy, we've all been afraid. That's how bullies work. They isolate us, make us think we're alone. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd survived 8 decades of neighborhood changes. But we're not alone. We never were. One by one, residents began standing, not just the longtime families, but newer residents too, people who'd moved here for the community, not to destroy it. I received a violation notice for my children's swing set, said a young mother near the back. The same swing set that's been in our backyard since we moved in 2 years ago. My garden gnome suddenly became aesthetically inappropriate, added Mr. Patel, after 8 years of no complaints. The stories poured out, systematic targeting disguised as rule enforcement, financial pressure designed to force sales, surveillance masked as security services. Sullivan was taking notes, building a case in real time. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Hartwell, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, harassment, stalking, and illegal surveillance. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Veronica looked around the room with genuine confusion, as if she couldn't understand how her perfectly reasonable plan had gone so wrong. You people don't understand, she said as Sullivan led her toward the door. This neighborhood needed improvement. Property values, I interrupted, aren't worth destroying families over. After they were gone, the room remained full of residents who'd rediscovered something they'd forgotten. They were a community. Not just adjacent properties, but connected neighbors who looked out for each other. Sarah squeezed my hand from her wheelchair. Your grandmother would be proud. I looked around at faces that had gone from frightened to angry to determined. She'd be relieved. It took her 40 years to build these relationships. Good to know they were worth preserving. The hardest part was over. The cleanup would take months, but for the first time since this whole mess started, I could imagine bringing our baby home to a neighborhood where they'd be safe, where they'd belong. 3 weeks after the arrests, our neighborhood looked different. Not physically, the same houses lined Maple Street, the same trees swayed in autumn breezes, but the atmosphere had shifted from fearful isolation to cautious community. Sarah was doing better too. Dr. Foster's latest checkup showed stable blood pressure, and the baby's movements had become reassuringly regular. The stress that had threatened preterm labor was finally lifting. "Look at this," Sarah said from her recliner, holding up her tablet. Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story on community organizing against HOA abuse. The local news coverage had been extensive. Surveillance Scheme Exposed had run for 3 nights straight, with reporters interviewing residents across multiple neighborhoods about similar harassment patterns. Turns out, we weren't Veronica's only targets. Pacific Development had been running identical operations in 4 other communities. My phone buzzed with a call from Detective Morrison, the fraud investigator assigned to our case. "Marcus, thought you'd want to know, we've made 2 more arrests. Pacific Development's regional manager and their chief financial officer. Your grandmother's documentation from the 1960s helped establish a pattern of systematic harassment going back decades." "How's that possible?" "Same company, same tactics, different generation. They've been using HOA infiltration as a gentrification tool for over 50 years. Your family's evidence was the missing piece that proved long-term conspiracy." After hanging up, I found Dot Martinez at my front door, carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone with important news. "The new board election results," she announced, settling into our living room chair. "Unanimous vote of no confidence in the remaining Hartwell supporters. Complete board replacement with longtime residents." "Including you as president?" "Including me as president." Her smile was tired but determined. 53 years in this neighborhood, and I finally get to help fix what I helped break. She opened her folder, revealing a stack of legal documents. First order of business, rescinding every violation notice issued in the past year. Second order, establishing a residents' rights committee to prevent future harassment. What about the surveillance equipment? FBI confiscated everything. Turns out Benjamin's company was violating federal wiretapping laws, not just local harassment statutes. Dot's expression hardened. 23 families across 5 neighborhoods were being monitored illegally. Sarah shifted in her chair, one hand on her belly. "What happens to their house?" "Civil asset forfeiture. The property was purchased with proceeds from fraud." Dot smiled grimly. "Mrs. Patterson has submitted a formal proposal to convert it into neighborhood community space." That afternoon, I walked through our backyard, checking the fence that had started this whole mess. My grandmother's roses were blooming again. Stress and proper watering had helped them recover from months of neglect. Mrs. Kim appeared at the property line, carrying pruning shears and wearing gardening gloves. "Marcus, your grandmother always said October was the best time for fall pruning. Mind if I help?" We worked in comfortable silence, 2 neighbors maintaining a garden that had survived 60 years of changes. Mrs. Kim had stories about each plant, each section of fence, each modification my grandmother had made over the decades. "She was very proud of you, you know," Mrs. Kim said as we gathered fallen leaves. "Used to show everyone pictures of your graduation, your wedding, your job with the computer company. I wish she'd lived to see her great-grandchild." She did, in a way. Every time you stood up to protect this house, this neighborhood, your family, that was her legacy continuing. My phone chimed with a text from Jake, my private investigator friend. "Pacific Development filing for bankruptcy. Looks like your case broke their entire operation. Nice work." That evening, Sarah and I sat on our front porch, something we hadn't felt safe doing in months. Neighbors walked by, some stopping to chat, others just waving. Normal neighborhood interactions that had seemed impossible during the harassment campaign. "It's quiet," Sarah observed. "Good quiet or bad quiet?" "Good quiet. Safe quiet." She rubbed her belly thoughtfully. "I can imagine bringing our baby home to this." Across the street, Miguel Martinez was helping Mrs. Patterson with her groceries. 2 houses down, the Johnson kids were playing in their yard without worried glances toward watching windows. The Patels had reinstalled their garden gnome, now accompanied by a small American flag and a "Welcome Neighbors" sign. Dr. Foster's car pulled up to the curb. She'd been making house calls since the arrests, monitoring Sarah's recovery, and documenting the medical impact of systematic harassment for the criminal case. "How are we feeling today?" she asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah's. "Optimistic, for the first time in months. Actually, optimistic. Blood pressure's been stable for 2 weeks, baby's positioning perfectly. I think we can start planning for a normal delivery." Dr. Foster smiled. Your stress levels dropping made all the difference. After she left, I looked around at the neighborhood my grandmother had fought to preserve, that Sarah and I had nearly lost, that our unborn child would inherit. The streetlights were coming on, windows glowing warmly in houses where families felt safe again. This was what community looked like when people chose connection over fear, when they stood together instead of suffering alone. My phone buzzed with a final message of the day. Unknown number, but this time I wasn't afraid to open it. Thank you for your courage. You saved our family too. The Johnsons. Similar messages had been arriving all week. Neighbors who'd been too scared to speak up during the harassment, now finding their voices again. Sarah squeezed my hand. Ready to go inside? Ready. 6 months later, I stood in our nursery at 3 a.m., holding my daughter Emma Chen against my chest as she slept peacefully. Through the window, I could see the street lights of Maple Street illuminating the neighborhood where she'd grow up, safe, protected, surrounded by a community that had learned to stand together. Sarah was recovering beautifully from delivery. Dr. Foster had been right. Eliminating stress had made all the difference. Emma arrived exactly on schedule, healthy and perfect, in a house that finally felt like home again. She looks like your grandmother, Sarah had whispered in the hospital, and she was right. Emma had inherited the Chen family's determined chin, the same one that had helped my grandmother weather decades of challenges. The legal aftermath had been swift and comprehensive. Veronica received 18 months for conspiracy to commit fraud and harassment. Benjamin got 2 years for illegal SUU, revelance, and stalking. Pacific Development Corporation faced federal racketeering charges that would likely put them out of business permanently. More importantly, their scheme had backfired spectacularly. Instead of driving out longtime residents, the community had rallied closer together than it had been in decades. Mrs. Patterson had organized weekly neighborhood dinners in the converted community space, Veronica's former house. The Martinez family had started a neighborhood watch program that actually watched out for each other, not surveilled for violations. The Patels had expanded their garden, sharing vegetables with anyone who wanted them. My phone buzzed with a text from Dot Martinez. Board meeting tomorrow. Final vote on the Chen Family Community Safety Award. Hope you can make it. They'd named an award after us. My grandmother would have been mortified by the attention and secretly thrilled by the recognition. Emma stirred in my arms, making soft baby sounds that somehow contained entire conversations about hunger, comfort, and contentment. I carried her downstairs to prepare a bottle, passing family photos that now included 3 generations of Chens who'd called this house home. In the kitchen, I found an envelope that had been slipped under our door. No postmark, just the Chen family written in careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message. Thank you for showing us that standing up works. Your courage gave us ours. The Brookhaven Neighborhood Association. Brookhaven was 2 towns over. Word of our victory had spread, inspiring other communities to organize against similar harassment schemes. Jake had called last week to tell me about 4 more HOA corruption cases that had been exposed after residents followed our example of documentation and community organizing. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing her robe and a tired smile. Feeding time already? Apparently, Emma inherited the Chen family schedule, up at all hours, never backing down from what she wants. Sarah laughed, settling into the same kitchen chair where we'd first planned our defense against Veronica's harassment. Think she'll grow up hearing this story? Probably, but hopefully she'll grow up in a neighborhood where she never has to live it. Through our kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Kim's house, where lights were on despite the early hour. At 83, she'd become something of a neighborhood historian, documenting the changes our community had undergone. She'd asked to interview us about the harassment campaign, wanting to preserve the story for future residents. So they understand, she'd said, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide not to accept injustice. Emma finished her bottle and settled back against my shoulder, her tiny hand gripping my finger with surprising strength. In that grip, I felt the continuation of something important, a family's refusal to be driven away, a community's commitment to protecting each other, a legacy that would outlast any harassment campaign. My grandmother had fought this battle in the 1960s with letters and photographs, building relationships one neighbor at a time. Sarah and I had fought it with digital evidence and community organizing, proving that documentation defeats intimidation. Emma would inherit a neighborhood where such battles hopefully wouldn't be necessary. But if they were, she'd also inherit the knowledge that ordinary people who stand together are stronger than any bully who tries to divide them. As sunrise broke over Maple Street, painting our kitchen in golden light, I realized this story wasn't really about HOA politics or harassment campaigns. It was about home, about what we're willing to fight to protect, and what we're willing to sacrifice to preserve for the people we love. Emma opened her eyes, looking directly at me with the serious expression babies wear when they're trying to understand the world they've inherited. "Welcome home, sweetheart," I whispered. "You're going to love it here."